The rain was drumming against my apartment window in downtown Chicago when my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Sarah. Dad's 65th birthday party. Saturday, 3 p.m. Mom wants the whole family there. I stared at the message for a long moment, my coffee growing cold in my hands. It had been 8 months since I'd last seen my father. 8 months since our last argument about my failed career choices, my wasted college education, and how I was throwing my life away, working at a nonprofit, instead of joining his construction company like my brother Mike had done. I'm Emma, 28 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove to my father that success isn't just measured in dollar signs. While Mike took over the family business and bought a house in the suburbs, I chose to work with homeless veterans, helping them find housing and mental health services. The pay was modest, but the work filled my soul in ways my father never seemed to understand. The party was being held at my childhood home in Oak Park, a modest 2-story house where the smell of my mother's cooking always mixed with the lingering scent of sawdust from my father's workshop in the garage. I could picture it perfectly. The living room where family photos lined the mantel, most of them featuring Mike's achievements, his high school football trophies, his wedding photo, pictures of him shaking hands with city contractors. My photos were there too, but they told a different story. My college graduation, where I'd earned a degree in social work, the picture from when I'd received an award for my work with veterans. But somehow these moments always felt diminished in that house, overshadowed by what my father saw as real accomplishments. As I got dressed that Saturday morning, I chose my clothes carefully. A simple blue dress that my mother had complimented before, hoping it might help set a positive tone. I wanted this day to be different. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through one family gathering without conflict. The drive to Oak Park felt longer than usual. Chicago's autumn had painted the trees in brilliant oranges and reds, and families were raking leaves in their front yards. I passed the park where I used to play as a child, where my father had taught me to ride a bike with more patience than he'd shown me in years. When I arrived, cars were already filling the driveway. Mike's pickup truck sat prominently near the garage, and I could see my uncle's sedan and my cousin's cars. The house was alive with the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting through the open windows. I took a deep breath and knocked on the front door. My mother answered, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "Emma, oh honey, I'm so glad you came." She pulled me into a warm embrace that smelled like vanilla and flour. "Your father will be so happy to see you." But as we walked into the living room, I caught my father's eye across the room. He was surrounded by relatives, holding court as he always did, but his expression when he saw me was unreadable. He nodded curtly in my direction, before turning back to his conversation with Uncle Jim about some big contract the company had just landed. The party was in full swing. Children ran between the adults' legs, my cousins shared stories about their jobs and families, and the house buzzed with the comfortable chaos of a large family gathering. I found myself gravitating toward the kitchen, where my mother was orchestrating the meal with the precision of a seasoned conductor. "Can I help with anything, Mom?" I asked, grateful for something to do with my hands. She smiled and handed me a stack of plates. "You can help me set the table. Tell me about work, sweetheart. How are your veterans doing?" As I arranged the plates around the dining room table, I told her about Marcus, a Vietnam veteran who'd finally found permanent housing after 2 years on the streets, and about the new program we were launching to help with job placement. My mother listened with the genuine interest she'd always shown in my work, asking thoughtful questions and celebrating the small victories with me. "That's wonderful, Emma. You're doing such important work," she said, squeezing my hand. "I hope your father..." "Hope your father what?" My dad's voice came from the doorway. He'd approached quietly, and I wondered how much he'd heard. "I was just telling Mom about some of the veterans I've been helping," I said, keeping my voice steady. He nodded slowly. "That's nice. Really nice. But you know, Emma, at some point you have to think about your own future. You can't save everyone." I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach. "I'm not trying to save everyone, Dad. I'm just trying to help where I can. And that's admirable," he said. But there was something in his tone that made it clear he didn't entirely mean it. "But when are you going to start thinking about building something for yourself? A real career? A family? A future?" Before I could respond, Mike appeared in the doorway. "Hey, Dad. Uncle Jim wants to talk to you about that new development project." He glanced at me with what might have been sympathy. "Hey, good to see you." My father patted Mike on the shoulder. "This is what I'm talking about, Emma. Your brother's already thinking about expanding the business, taking on bigger projects. He's building something lasting." And just like that, the comparison I'd been dreading had begun. I excused myself and stepped outside onto the back porch, where the cool October air helped clear my head. The backyard looked smaller than I remembered, but the old oak tree where I used to read as a child still stood tall and proud. I could hear the party continuing inside, the rise and fall of voices, the clink of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter. This was supposed to be a celebration, a time for family to come together and enjoy each other's company. But already, I felt like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for the next comment about my choices, my life, my apparent failure to meet expectations. As I stood there, watching the last of the autumn leaves drift down from the oak tree, I made a decision. I would stay for dinner, I would be polite and respectful, and I would try to enjoy this time with my family. But I wouldn't let anyone, not even my father, make me feel ashamed of the work I'd chosen to do or the life I'd built for myself. Little did I know that this resolution would be tested in ways I never could have imagined. Dinner was called an hour later, and the family gathered around the extended dining room table that had been set up for the occasion. My mother had outdone herself. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans from her garden, and fresh rolls that filled the house with their warm, yeasty aroma. It was the kind of meal that made you remember why family gatherings could be magical. I found myself seated between my cousin Lisa and my Aunt Carol, both of whom had always been kind to me. Lisa was a teacher at the local elementary school, and Carol worked as a nurse at the nearby hospital. They understood the calling to help others, even if the pay wasn't always spectacular. "Emma, Lisa was just telling me about your work with veterans," Aunt Carol said as she passed the mashed potatoes. "It sounds incredibly meaningful." "It is," I said, grateful for the opportunity to share. "We just helped a young woman who served in Afghanistan find housing and get connected with therapy services. She's doing so much better now." "That's beautiful," Lisa said. "It must be so rewarding to see people get back on their feet." From across the table, I caught my father listening to our conversation while he carved the roast. His expression was neutral, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was probably calculating how much I made compared to what I could be earning in his company. "You know, Emma," my Uncle Jim said from the head of the table, "your father was just telling me about how well the business is doing. They're expanding into commercial construction now. There's probably room for someone with your organizational skills." Here we go, I thought. The subtle, and not so subtle, suggestions that I should abandon my career and join the family business had been a constant theme for years. Even well-meaning relatives seemed to think that working with my father would somehow be the solution to all my problems. "That's kind of you to suggest, Uncle Jim," I said carefully. "But I really love what I do. There's something special about helping people rebuild their lives." "But is it sustainable?" my father asked, setting down his carving knife. "I mean, financially. You're nearly 30, Emma. Don't you want to be able to buy a house, start a family?" The table grew quiet. Even the children seemed to sense the tension and stopped their chatter. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. "I'm doing fine, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I may not make as much as Mike, but I'm not struggling. And there are other ways to measure success besides money." "Are there?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you're spinning your wheels. You rent an apartment, you drive a car that's 10 years old, and you're spending your days with people who what?" I interrupted, my own voice getting sharper. "Who deserve help, who served their country and came home to find themselves forgotten." "That's not what I meant," he said, but I could see the defensive look in his eyes. "I just think you're wasting your potential. You're smart, Emma. You could be doing so much more with your life." Mike cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Dad, maybe we should—" "No, Mike," I said, standing up from the table. "Let him finish. I want to hear what he really thinks." My father looked around the table at the faces of his family, all watching this confrontation unfold. "I think you're hiding behind this do-gooder act because you're afraid of real responsibility. It's easy to help other people when you don't have to worry about building anything for yourself." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush with anger and hurt. "A do-gooder act? Is that what you think this is?" "Emma, honey, sit down," my mother said gently. "Let's all take a breath." But I couldn't sit down. 28 years of disappointment, of never being good enough, of having my choices questioned and dismissed, came rushing to the surface. "You want to know what I think, Dad? I think you're so obsessed with money and status that you can't see the value in anything else. I think you're disappointed that I didn't turn out to be another version of Mike, ready to follow in your footsteps without question." "That's not fair," he said, his voice getting louder. "I built this business from nothing. I worked 16-hour days so you and your brother could have opportunities I never had. And what do you do with those opportunities? You throw them away to play social worker." "I'm not playing anything," I shouted back. "I'm making a difference in people's lives. I'm helping veterans who risked everything for this country find their way home. But you can't see that because it doesn't fit your definition of success." The room was completely silent now. My young cousins looked scared, and I could see my mother's eyes filling with tears. But I couldn't stop. Years of held-back words came pouring out. "You know what, Dad? You're right. I'm not like Mike. I didn't want to spend my life laying concrete and building strip malls. I wanted to build something different. Hope, community, healing. But you've never been able to see that as valuable because you can't put a price tag on it." My father's face was red now, and I could see the vein in his forehead that always appeared when he was truly angry. You want to know what I see, Emma? I see a woman who's afraid to take any real risks, who's content to live paycheck to paycheck as long as she can feel good about herself. I see someone who's still the same dreamy kid who used to sit under that oak tree reading books, instead of learning practical skills. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt something break inside me, not just my heart, but my last hope that my father might someday understand who I was and what I cared about. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. I am still that dreamy kid. But you know what? That dreamy kid grew up to be someone who makes a difference. Someone who doesn't measure her worth by the size of her bank account. I looked around the table at my family, my mother's tear-filled eyes, Mike's uncomfortable fidgeting, my relatives' shocked expressions. These people loved me, I knew that. But love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between who I was and who my father wanted me to be. I'm sorry I disappointed you, Dad, I said, my voice shaking. I'm sorry I'm not the daughter you wanted, but I'm not sorry for the life I've chosen or the work I do. I started to walk toward the door, but my father's voice stopped me. Emma, wait. I didn't mean... I turned back to face him. Yes, you did. You meant every word. And you know what? I'm tired of pretending it doesn't hurt. As I grabbed my purse from the counter, I could hear my mother calling my name, but I didn't stop. I needed to get out of that house, away from the judgment and disappointment, away from the feeling that I would never be enough. The drive back to Chicago was a blur of tears and anger. I thought about all the times I'd tried to prove myself, all the awards and recognition that had never seemed to matter, all the lives I'd helped change that apparently counted for nothing in my father's eyes. But as I pulled into my apartment complex, I felt something else beginning to stir alongside the hurt, a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I'd spoken my truth without worrying about keeping the peace. I'd stood up for myself and my choices, even if it meant facing my father's disapproval. I didn't know it yet, but that confrontation would be just the beginning of a much larger reckoning. I spent the rest of Saturday evening curled up on my couch with a cup of tea, and my phone turned off, trying to process what had happened. My small apartment felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the family gathering. Simple, peaceful, and authentically mine. The walls were covered with photos from my work, veterans I'd helped, community events, moments of genuine joy and connection. On my coffee table sat a handwritten thank you note from Marcus, the veteran I'd helped find housing. Emma, it read, you gave me more than a place to live. You gave me hope. Thank you for seeing the person I could be, not just the person I was. I held the note in my hands and felt tears welling up again, but this time they weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of validation. This was why I did what I did. This was what mattered. Sunday morning brought a series of missed calls and text messages. My mother had called 4 times, Mike had texted twice, and even Uncle Jim had reached out. But it was my mother's voicemail that finally made me pick up the phone. Emma, sweetheart, I'm so sorry about yesterday. Your father, he didn't mean what he said. He's just worried about you. Please call me back. I love you. When I called her back, she answered on the first ring. Emma? Oh, honey, I'm so glad you called. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom, I said, though my voice still felt raw from crying. I'm sorry I left like that. I didn't mean to ruin Dad's party. You didn't ruin anything, she said firmly. If anything, it was long overdue. Your father has been holding in his worries about you for years, and maybe it needed to come out. Worries? I laughed bitterly. Mom, he called my work a do-gooder act. He thinks I'm wasting my life. There was a long pause on the other end. Emma, can I tell you something? Something I've never told you before? Of course. When your father was your age, he wanted to be a teacher. Did you know that? I sat up straighter. What? No, I had no idea. He was studying education in college when his father got sick. He had to drop out and take over the family business to support his mother and younger siblings. He never got to finish his degree, never got to teach. I think when he sees you helping people, it reminds him of the dreams he had to give up. This revelation hit me like a thunderbolt, but that doesn't give him the right to make me feel terrible about my choices. No, it doesn't, my mother agreed. But it might help you understand why he reacts the way he does. He sees you having the freedom to follow your passion, and part of him resents it. Not because he doesn't love you, but because he never had that choice. I thought about this as we talked. It didn't excuse my father's behavior, but it did provide some context for years of tension I'd never fully understood. Mom, I can't keep having these fights with him. I can't keep defending my life choices every time we're in the same room. I know, sweetheart, and I think your father knows it too. He was pretty shaken up after you left. He spent the rest of the evening sitting on the back porch just thinking. Monday morning brought a return to routine. I arrived at the community center where I work to find my colleague David already at his desk, reviewing case files. How was the family party? He asked, looking up from his paperwork. It was eventful, I said, settling into my chair. Let's just say my father and I had a disagreement about career choices. David nodded knowingly. He'd heard about my family dynamics before. You know, Emma, I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I've learned something important. You can't change how other people see your value. You can only change how much their opinions affect you. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Sharon, our program director. Emma, I need to see you in my office when you have a minute, she said. I exchanged a glance with David. Sharon's tone was serious, and I wondered if there was some kind of problem with one of my cases. When I knocked on her door, she looked up from her computer with a smile. Come in, Emma. Close the door behind you. I sat down across from her desk, trying to read her expression. Is everything okay? Everything's more than okay, she said, leaning back in her chair. I just got off the phone with the state health department. They're implementing a new statewide program for veteran services, and they want to model it after our program here. They're looking for someone to head up the initiative. My heart started beating faster. That sounds amazing. Who are they considering? Sharon smiled. Emma, they asked specifically for you. Apparently, word about your work has gotten around. The position would be based in Springfield, and it would involve training teams across the state to implement similar programs in their communities. I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. Are you serious? Dead serious. The salary is significantly higher than what you're making now, about $40,000 more a year, plus benefits, travel allowances, and the opportunity to impact veteran services across the entire state. I felt like I was dreaming. After years of wondering if my work really mattered, of questioning whether I was making a difference, this felt like validation on a scale I'd never imagined. What would I need to do? I asked. First, you'd need to be interested, Sharon said with a laugh. Then you'd need to interview with the state committee. But Emma, I've already written a recommendation letter, and I know several other people who would be happy to vouch for your work. This is your opportunity to take everything you've learned here and scale it up. I thought about my father's words from Saturday night, about taking risks, about building something lasting. This was exactly that kind of opportunity. It was a chance to move beyond helping individual veterans to creating systems that could help thousands. I'm interested, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm definitely interested. Good. The interview is next Friday in Springfield. I'll email you all the details. As I walked back to my desk, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was the biggest opportunity of my career, a chance to prove that the work I'd been doing wasn't just meaningful, it was scalable and important enough to be replicated across the state. But it also meant leaving Chicago, leaving the community center where I'd found my calling, and potentially moving further away from my family, even if that family didn't always understand or support my choices. I spent the rest of the day calling veterans I'd worked with, getting their permission to use their stories in my interview. Marcus was particularly enthusiastic when I told him about the opportunity. Emma, this is incredible, he said over the phone. You're going to be able to help so many more people. And you know what? You deserve this. You've worked hard for this moment. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the strange timing of everything. Just 2 days after my father had questioned my career choices and suggested I was wasting my potential, I was being offered a position that would validate everything I'd been working toward. I pulled into my parking space and sat in my car for a moment, watching the sun set over the Chicago skyline. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. But I also knew that accepting this position would mean more than just a career change. It would mean finally, definitively, choosing my own path regardless of what anyone else thought, including my father. The question was I ready to take that step? 3 days after learning about the Springfield opportunity, I was reviewing my interview materials when my phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach clenched. We hadn't spoken since Saturday's disaster, and I wasn't sure I was ready for another confrontation. I let it ring twice more before answering. Hi, Dad. Emma. His voice was quieter than usual, almost tentative. I was wondering if we could talk. We're talking now, I said, not making it easy for him. I mean in person. Could I take you to lunch? There's something I need to say to you. I looked at my reflection in my laptop screen. I looked tired, worn down by days of replaying our argument and questioning everything I thought I knew about our relationship. I don't know if that's such a good idea, Dad. I'm not sure either of us is ready for round 2. Please, Emma, just one lunch. If you want to leave after that, I'll understand. There was something in his voice, a vulnerability I'd rarely heard before. Against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing to meet him at a small cafe near my apartment. An hour later, I sat across from my father at a corner table, both of us nursing coffee and avoiding eye contact. He looked older than I remembered, with deeper lines around his eyes and gray creeping into his hair at the temples. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. About me not understanding the value of what you do. Dad, if you brought me here to tell me I was wrong. No, he interrupted. I brought you here to tell you that you were right. I stared at him, not sure I'd heard correctly. I've spent the last few days thinking about a lot of things, he continued. About you, about Mike, about the choices I've made, and the choices I've expected you to make. And I realized something that I should have realized a long time ago. He paused, looking out the window at the busy street beyond. Your mother told me about the state job, the one they offered you because of your work with veterans. My heart skipped. She told you? She told me because she thought I should know that my daughter, my brilliant, compassionate daughter, is being recognized for the incredible work she's been doing, work that I've been too stupid and too proud to acknowledge. I felt tears threatening again. Dad, let me finish, he said, finally meeting my eyes. I owe you an apology, Emma, a real one. What I said at the party was wrong. Not just wrong, it was cruel. You're not hiding behind anything, and you're not wasting your potential. You're using your potential in ways I was too narrow-minded to see. I waited for the but that usually followed his rare moments of vulnerability. It didn't come. I want to tell you about something, he said, his voice getting quieter. About why I reacted the way I did. Mom told me about you wanting to be a teacher, I said. He nodded. She told me she'd talk to you about that. But there's more to it than just giving up teaching. He took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. When I was 25, I volunteered at a literacy program for adults. It was just a few hours a week, but it was the most rewarding thing I'd ever done. I helped this one man, a veteran from Vietnam, learn to read well enough to help his daughter with her homework. I leaned forward, surprised by this revelation. His name was Robert, my father continued. He'd been too embarrassed to tell anyone he couldn't read, but he trusted me enough to let me help him. When he finally read his first complete book, it was Where the Red Fern Grows. He cried, and so did I. Dad, I had no idea. When I had to quit school and take over the business, I had to give up the literacy program too. I told myself it was just a hobby, that it didn't matter, but it did matter. It mattered a lot. And when I see you doing the work you do, helping people the way you do, it reminds me of how good it felt to make that kind of difference. I felt my anger beginning to dissolve, replaced by something more complex. Understanding, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. But that still doesn't explain why you've been so critical of my work, I said. He sighed heavily. Because I was jealous, and because I was scared. Scared of what? Scared that you'd end up like me, full of regret about the chances you didn't take, the dreams you didn't follow. I thought if I could push you toward something more financially stable, more traditional, you'd be protected from that kind of disappointment. But Dad, I'm not disappointed. I love what I do. I know that now, he said, and I should have known it before. I should have seen that you found a way to follow your passion and make a career out of it. You did what I never managed to do. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing this new understanding. There's something else, he said. Something I should have told you a long time ago. What? I'm proud of you, Emma. I'm proud of the work you do and the person you've become. I may not understand all of it, but I can see the difference you make in people's lives. And I'm sorry it took me so long to say that. I felt tears spilling down my cheeks. Dad, I've been waiting to hear you say that for years. I know, and I'm sorry I made you wait so long. He reached across the table and took my hand. Your mother also told me about the interview in Springfield. Are you going to take it? I think so, I said. It's a chance to help create programs like ours across the state. It could help thousands of veterans. That's incredible, Emma. That's exactly the kind of opportunity you deserve. It would mean moving away from Chicago, though. Away from family. My father squeezed my hand. Sweetheart, your family will always be here. But opportunities like this don't come along very often. You should take it. Really? Really. And when you do, I want you to know that I'll be bragging about you to anyone who'll listen. My daughter, the State Director of Veteran Services. It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? I laughed through my tears. It does, actually. Emma, I have one more thing to ask you. A favor. What? Would you consider bringing some of your veterans to the house sometime? I'd like to meet them, to hear their stories. I think it would help me understand better what you do and why it matters so much. I stared at him in amazement. Are you serious? Dead serious. And maybe I could help somehow. I don't know how, but if there's anything I can do to support your work, I want to do it. Dad, that would be amazing. We finished our coffee and walked outside together. The afternoon sun was warm on our faces, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking beside my father rather than away from him. I love you, Emma, he said as we reached my car. I should have said that at the party instead of all those other things. I love you too, Dad, and thank you for this. For apologizing, for understanding, for everything. Thank you for not giving up on me, he said, even when I gave you every reason to. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in months. The wound from Saturday's confrontation wasn't completely healed, but it was beginning to mend. More importantly, I felt like I'd finally been seen and understood by the person whose approval had mattered most to me. Now I just had to prepare for the interview that could change everything. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my nervous energy as I drove the 3 hours to Springfield. I'd spent the entire week preparing for this interview, reviewing case studies, practicing my presentation, and trying to imagine how I'd implement a statewide program based on our successful model in Chicago. The state building was an imposing structure of glass and steel, very different from the cozy community center where I'd spent the last 5 years. As I sat in the waiting room, I thought about all the veterans I'd worked with and how this opportunity could potentially help thousands more people just like them. Ms. Emma Richardson, a woman in a professional suit, approached me. "I'm Dr. Patricia Williams, the state coordinator for Veteran Services. Thank you for coming." She led me into a conference room where 3 other people were seated around a polished oak table. They introduced themselves as representatives from the state health department, the Veterans Affairs Office, and a current program director from another region. "Emma," Dr. Williams began, "we've reviewed your work in Chicago and we're impressed. Your program has one of the highest success rates in the state for veteran housing placement and mental health service connections. Can you walk us through your approach?" I launched into my presentation, describing the holistic model we developed, how we didn't just focus on housing, but also addressed mental health, job training, and community integration. I shared Marcus's story and several others, painting a picture of how comprehensive care could transform lives. "What we've learned," I explained, "is that veterans often need more than just a place to live. They need a support system, a sense of purpose, and help navigating systems that can be overwhelming. Our approach treats each veteran as a whole person, not just a housing statistic." The panel asked thoughtful questions about scalability, funding, and training protocols. I found myself getting excited as I talked about the potential for expansion, the ways technology could help us track outcomes across multiple sites, and the importance of training local staff to understand the unique challenges veterans face. Ms. Richardson, the Veterans Affairs representative, said, "This position would require significant travel across the state, training new teams, and managing a much larger budget than you've worked with before. How do you feel about taking on those responsibilities?" "I'm excited about the challenge," I said honestly. "For the past 5 years, I've been working one-on-one with veterans, and while that's incredibly rewarding, I know there are thousands of others who need the same kind of support. This position would allow me to multiply that impact exponentially." Dr. Williams nodded approvingly. "What do you see as the biggest challenges in implementing this program statewide?" "Consistency," I said without hesitation. "Every community has different resources, different challenges, different populations. The key will be creating a framework that's flexible enough to adapt to local needs while maintaining the core principles that make the program effective." The interview continued for another hour, covering everything from budget management to staff training to outcome measurement. By the end, I felt like I'd given the best presentation of my career. "Emma," Dr. Williams said as we wrapped up, "do you have any questions for us?" "Just one," I said. "What's the timeline for implementation? How quickly are you hoping to roll this out?" "We're hoping to have the program operational in 10 pilot sites within 6 months, with full statewide implementation within 2 years. It's ambitious, but we believe it's necessary given the need we're seeing across the state." As I drove back to Chicago, I replayed the interview in my mind. I felt confident about my responses, but more than that, I felt energized by the possibility of what we could accomplish. This wasn't just a job opportunity. It was a chance to create lasting change on a scale I'd never imagined. My phone rang as I hit the Chicago city limits. It was my mother. "How did it go, sweetheart?" "I think it went well," I said. "Really well, actually. I won't know for sure until next week, but I feel good about it. Your father wanted me to tell you that he's proud of you for going after this opportunity. He said to tell you that regardless of what happens, you should know that you impressed them just by being yourself." I smiled. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." "Emma, can I ask you something? Are you nervous about the idea of moving away from Chicago? Away from all of us?" I'd been asking myself the same question all week. "A little," I admitted. "But I think it's time. I've spent so many years trying to prove myself here, trying to fit into everyone else's expectations. Maybe it's time to build something completely my own." "Well, Springfield isn't that far," she said practically. "We could visit, and you could come home for holidays." "Mom, about the holidays. I want to make sure things are really okay with Dad before I commit to anything long-term. I can't go back to walking on eggshells every time we're together." "Things are different now, Emma. I can see it in your father. That conversation with you really changed something in him. He's been asking me about your work, wanting to understand it better. Yesterday, he even looked up articles about veteran homelessness. This was more progress than I'd seen in years." "Really? Really? And he's serious about wanting to meet some of the veterans you've helped." I think he's starting to understand that what you do isn't just a job, it's a calling. Monday morning brought the call I'd been both hoping for and dreading. Dr. Williams called just as I was settling in at my desk. Emma, I have good news. The committee was unanimous. We'd like to offer you the position. My heart leaped. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. The salary is $55,000 more than your current position, plus full benefits and a relocation allowance. When could you start? I'd need to give my current employer at least 2 weeks' notice, but I could start as early as 3 weeks from today. Perfect. I'll email you the formal offer letter this afternoon. Emma, we're really excited to have you on board. This program is going to change lives across Illinois. After I hung up, I sat at my desk in a daze. David looked over from his computer. Good news, I'm guessing? I got it, I said, still not quite believing it. I got the job. David grinned and came over to give me a hug. Emma, that's incredible. You deserve this so much. The next few hours were a whirlwind of congratulations from colleagues, practical conversations with Sharon about transitioning my caseload, and the surreal feeling that my life was about to change dramatically. That evening, I called my parents to share the news. Emma, my mother exclaimed when I told her. Oh, sweetheart, we're so proud of you. Is Dad there? I asked. I'm here. His voice came through the speaker. Emma, congratulations. This is incredible news. Thanks, Dad. I start in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? My mother said. That's so soon. We'll need to help you find an apartment, get you moved. Mom, I can handle it, I said, but I was smiling, although I wouldn't say no to help apartment hunting. Emma, my father said, before you move to Springfield, would you be willing to bring some of your veterans by the house? I know I mentioned it before, but I'd really like to meet them, and maybe I could help with your move, if you want. I felt tears welling up again. 6 months ago, I never would have imagined my father offering to help with a move that was taking me further away from the family business, further from his vision of what my life should look like. I'd love that, Dad. Both things. Bringing some veterans by and help with the move. Good. It's settled then. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. I found an apartment in Springfield, a small but bright place with a view of a park that reminded me of the one from my childhood. I spent my last days at the community center saying goodbye to veterans I'd worked with and ensuring smooth transitions for my ongoing cases. Marcus insisted on taking me out for coffee on my last day. Emma, I need you to know something, he said as we sat in our usual cafe. When I first met you, I was living in my car and hadn't spoken to my daughter in 2 years. I thought my life was over. Marcus? No, let me finish. Because of you, I have an apartment, a part-time job, and I'm back in touch with my daughter. But more than that, you helped me remember who I was before the war, before everything fell apart. You gave me back my dignity. I was crying openly now. You did the hard work, Marcus. I just helped you access the resources. Maybe, he said, but you saw something in me when I couldn't see it in myself. And now you're going to do that for hundreds of other people. Thousands of people. Do you understand how incredible that is? As I cleaned out my desk that afternoon, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I'd started working with veterans because I believed everyone deserved a chance to rebuild their lives. I'd never imagined it would lead to an opportunity to impact policy at the state level. But more than the professional opportunity, I thought about the personal growth of the past few weeks. The confrontation with my father that had felt so devastating at the time had actually cleared the air between us in ways I never thought possible. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like he truly saw and understood who I was. That Saturday, I kept my promise and brought Marcus and 2 other veterans to my parents' house. My father spent hours talking with them, asking thoughtful questions about their experiences and really listening to their answers. I watched him talking with Robert, a Vietnam veteran who reminded me of the man my father had mentioned helping with literacy all those years ago. Emma, my father said as we were cleaning up after dinner, I owe you another apology. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I called your work a do-gooder act, but spending time with Marcus and Robert and Jennifer today, I can see that what you do is real. It's necessary. It changes lives in ways that building another strip mall never could. Both kinds of work matter, Dad. Your work provides jobs and builds communities. Mine just happens to focus on rebuilding individual lives. Maybe, he said, but I think what you do might be more important than what I do. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. Moving day arrived with typical Illinois weather, overcast skies and a chill in the air that hinted at the coming winter. My father showed up at my apartment at 7 a.m. sharp with his pickup truck and a thermos of coffee, ready to help load my belongings. You don't have much stuff, he observed as we carried boxes down to the truck. I've never been much of a collector, I said. Besides, most of what matters to me isn't really stuff. It's relationships, experiences, memories. He nodded thoughtfully. That's probably healthier than my approach. Your mother's always telling me we have too much junk in the garage. The drive to Springfield took about 4 hours with stops, and we spent most of it talking, really talking, for the first time in years. He told me more about his abandoned teaching dreams and his early days building the construction business. I shared stories about veterans I'd worked with and my hopes for the new program. Emma, he said as we unloaded the truck at my new apartment, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Okay, do you think you'll be happy here? Away from Chicago? Away from the work you've been doing? I looked around at my new apartment, bright and airy with hardwood floors and big windows that let in plenty of natural light. I think I'll be more than happy, Dad. I think I'll be fulfilled. This job is everything I've been working toward. Good, he said, setting down a box of books, because I want you to know that your mother and I support you completely. Whatever you need, whatever challenges you face, we're here for you. Even if the program doesn't work out, even if I fail, especially then, he said firmly. But Emma, you're not going to fail. You're too smart, too dedicated, and too good at what you do. My first day at the state office was both exciting and overwhelming. Dr. Williams introduced me to the team I'd be working with, policy analysts, budget specialists, and field coordinators who would help implement the program across the state. My office was small but functional, with a view of the Capitol building that reminded me daily of the significance of the work we were doing. Emma, Dr. Williams said as she showed me to my desk, we're starting with pilot programs in 10 communities. I want you to spend the first month visiting each site, assessing their current resources, and developing customized implementation plans. That sounds perfect, I said. When do I start traveling? Next week. We've scheduled meetings with local service providers, veterans organizations, and community leaders in each location. Your job is to figure out how to adapt our model to their specific needs and resources. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of travel across Illinois. I visited small rural towns where resources were limited, but community connections were strong, and larger cities where services existed but weren't well coordinated. In each location, I met with local veterans and heard their stories that reminded me why this work mattered so much. In Rockford, I met a female veteran named Sarah who was struggling with PTSD and couldn't find appropriate housing with her service dog. In Peoria, I talked with a group of older veterans who felt forgotten by existing services. In Carbondale, I discovered a thriving veterans community that just needed better coordination to serve more people effectively. Each visit reinforced my belief that the program could work, but also highlighted the importance of local adaptation. What worked in Chicago wouldn't necessarily work in rural Illinois, and what worked in one small town might need adjustment for another. 3 weeks into my new job, I got a call that surprised me. Emma, this is Marcus. I hope it's okay that I got your number from David. Marcus, of course it's okay. How are you doing? I'm good. Really good, actually. But I'm calling because I have some news. I've been thinking about what you're doing in Springfield, and I want to help. Help how? I've been talking with some of the other veterans from the program, and we want to create a peer support network. Veterans helping other veterans, you know? We could share our experiences, provide mentorship, maybe even help with job searches and housing applications. I felt goosebumps rising on my arms. Marcus, that's brilliant. Peer support is one of the most effective interventions we can offer. Would something like that fit into your statewide program? It would be perfect for the statewide program, I said, my mind already racing with possibilities. Marcus, would you be willing to help me develop that component? Maybe even present it to the state committee? Are you serious? You want me to present to the state? I'm completely serious. You understand the veteran experience in ways that I never could. Your voice, your story, your ideas, they could make this program so much more effective. 2 months later, Marcus joined me in Springfield for a presentation to the state steering committee. He talked about his journey from homelessness to stability, the role peer support had played in his recovery, and his vision for a veteran-led mentorship network. When Emma first approached me, he told the committee, I was suspicious. Another social worker, another program, another person who thought they knew what I needed. But Emma was different. She listened. She saw me as a person, not a problem to be solved. And that's what this program does. It treats veterans as whole human beings with unique strengths and challenges. The committee was so impressed that they approved funding for the peer support component immediately. As Marcus and I celebrated over dinner that night, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. I was doing work that challenged and fulfilled me in ways I'd never imagined. My relationship with my father had transformed from a source of stress to a source of support. And I was building something that would outlast my individual contributions, a system that could help veterans across the state for years to come. Emma, Marcus said, raising his coffee cup in a toast, here's to second chances and new beginnings. To second chances, I agreed, and to never giving up on what matters most. But even as I celebrated these successes, I had no idea that the biggest challenge, and the biggest opportunity of my career was still ahead of me. 6 months into my new role, the statewide Veteran Services Program was exceeding all expectations. We'd successfully launched pilot programs in all 10 target communities, trained over 200 local service providers, and helped more than 1,000 veterans find stable housing and support services. The success had caught the attention of officials beyond Illinois. I was invited to present our model at a national conference on veteran services in Washington, D.C., where representatives from other states were eager to learn about our approach. Standing at the podium in a conference room filled with policymakers, service providers, and advocates from across the country, I felt the weight of the moment. 5 years ago, I'd been a caseworker helping one veteran at a time. Now I was sharing strategies that could potentially help thousands of veterans nationwide. The key to our success, I told the audience, has been recognizing that effective veteran services require both professional expertise and lived experience. When we combine evidence-based practices with peer support and community engagement, we create programs that don't just house veterans, they help them rebuild their lives. After my presentation, a woman approached me from the audience. Ms. Richardson, I'm Dr. Jennifer Martinez from the Department of Veterans Affairs. We've been following your work in Illinois, and we're interested in discussing how your model might be adapted for national implementation. My heart skipped a beat. National implementation? We're looking at creating a federal initiative based on successful state programs like yours. Would you be interested in joining a task force to develop national guidelines? The conversation that followed opened up possibilities I'd never dared to imagine. The federal government was serious about scaling up our approach, and they wanted me to be part of the leadership team. But as exciting as the opportunity was, it also raised complicated questions. Taking on a federal role would mean moving to Washington, D.C., and leaving behind the Illinois program I'd worked so hard to build. I called my parents from my hotel room that evening. "Emma, that's incredible!" my mother exclaimed when I told her about the federal opportunity. "The national impact you could have." "I know," I said, "but I'm torn, Mom. The Illinois program is just getting started. I don't want to abandon it before it's fully established." "Sweetheart," my father's voice came through the speakerphone, "can I ask you something? What does your gut tell you to do?" It was such a different question from the ones he used to ask, questions about salary and security and conventional success. My gut tells me that this federal opportunity could help create the kind of systematic change that veterans need nationwide, but it also tells me I'm not ready to leave Illinois yet. "Then maybe that's your answer," he said. "Maybe you tell them you're interested, but you need more time to ensure the Illinois program is sustainable first. You think I should turn down a federal position? I think you should make the decision that aligns with your values and your timeline, not anyone else's," he said. "You've proven that you know what you're doing, Emma. Trust yourself." His response surprised me with its wisdom and support. The father who had once pushed me toward conventional success was now encouraging me to follow my own instincts, even if it meant turning down a prestigious opportunity. I spent the flight back to Springfield thinking about the conversation. When I arrived at my office the next morning, I found Dr. Williams waiting with coffee and a concerned expression. "How was D.C.?" she asked. "Complicated," I said, settling into my chair. "They offered me a federal position." Her face fell slightly. "I was afraid of that. Emma, I know we can't compete with federal opportunities, but I hope you know how valuable you are here." "That's just it," I said. "I don't want to leave yet. The Illinois program is working, but it needs more time to become truly self-sustaining. I think I need to stay and see this through before I take on something bigger." Dr. Williams smiled with obvious relief. "Are you sure? Federal positions don't come along often." "I'm sure. For now, anyway. Maybe in a year or two, when our program is fully established and we have a strong leadership team in place." "Well, in that case," she said, pulling out a folder, "I have some exciting news that might make staying even more appealing." "What kind of news?" "The governor's office has been reviewing our program outcomes, and they're so impressed that they want to expand it. They're proposing to double our budget and extend the program to all 102 counties in Illinois." I stared at her in amazement. "All 102 counties? All 102 counties. Which means we'd need to significantly expand our team, develop new training protocols, and create regional coordination centers. It would be a massive undertaking." "It would be incredible," I said, my mind already racing with the possibilities. "How long do we have to prepare?" 6 months to develop the expansion plan, 12 months to implement Phase 1. "Emma, this would make Illinois a national model for comprehensive veteran services. Other states would be studying what we're doing here." As we discussed the details of the expansion, I felt a sense of certainty I hadn't experienced in weeks. This was where I needed to be. This was the work I needed to be doing. The federal opportunity would wait, or perhaps by the time I was ready for it, I'd have even more experience and credibility to bring to the role. That weekend, I drove back to Chicago to share the news with my family. My parents were hosting a barbecue, and for the first time in years, I was looking forward to a family gathering. "Emma," my father called as I walked into the backyard. Perfect timing. I was just telling Uncle Jim about your program. I looked around and saw not just my immediate family, but the same relatives who had witnessed our confrontation 8 months earlier. The atmosphere was completely different now. Warm, welcoming, proud. Emma, your father's been bragging about you nonstop, Aunt Carol said with a smile. He showed us the newspaper article about your program. There was a newspaper article? In the Springfield paper, my father said proudly, about the program's success and your role in developing it. I may have saved a few copies. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself sharing stories about veterans I'd helped, challenges we'd overcome, and plans for the statewide expansion. My relatives listened with genuine interest and asked thoughtful questions. The contrast with the birthday party 8 months earlier was striking. Later, as I helped my mother clean up, she pulled me aside. Emma, I need to tell you something. Your father framed that newspaper article and hung it in his office, right next to the picture of Mike's first big construction contract. I felt tears welling up. Really? Really? And he's been telling everyone who will listen about his daughter, the state director. He even looked up statistics about veteran homelessness, so he could better understand the scope of what you're working on. That evening, as the family gathered in the living room, my father stood up with his coffee cup. I want to make a toast, he said, to Emma, who found her calling and had the courage to follow it, even when some people, he looked at me meaningfully, were too stubborn to see its value. Dad, you don't need to— Yes, I do, he interrupted. Emma, you're making a difference in ways that most people only dream about. You're giving veterans hope, dignity, and second chances. You're building something that will outlast all of us. And I'm proud, so proud, to be your father. The room erupted in applause, and I found myself crying happy tears for what felt like the 100th time in recent months. Thank you, I said when the applause died down. All of you, for supporting me, for believing in me, and for understanding that success comes in many different forms. To Emma, Mike said, raising his own cup, who proved that sometimes the most important work is the work that helps people find their way home. As I drove back to Springfield that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The confrontation at my father's birthday party that had felt so devastating at the time had actually been the catalyst for the most honest and meaningful relationship we'd ever had. I'd learned that standing up for your values, even when it's difficult, can sometimes be the very thing that earns you the respect you've been seeking. I'd discovered that following your passion doesn't mean sacrificing success. It means defining success on your own terms. And I'd found that the work you're meant to do will find a way to expand and grow, creating opportunities you never could have imagined. As I pulled into my apartment complex in Springfield, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do, surrounded by people who understood and supported my choices. The girl who used to sit under the oak tree reading books and dreaming about making a difference had grown up to become a woman who was doing exactly that. And for the first time in my life, I knew that was more than enough. It was everything. 2 years later, Illinois' Veteran Services Program became the national model that other states began implementing. Marcus was hired as the state's first peer support coordinator, and the program had helped over 10,000 veterans find stable housing and support services. I eventually did take a federal position, but not until I'd spent 3 years ensuring that the Illinois program was sustainable and replicable. By then, my father had become one of the program's biggest advocates, even volunteering his construction services to help create transitional housing for veterans. The last family gathering I attended was markedly different from that fateful birthday party. This time, it was a celebration of the program's national recognition, and my father introduced me to everyone as my daughter, the one who's changing lives across the country. I never did have to leave another family party early, and I never had to defend my choices again. Because sometimes when you stand up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult, even when it means facing conflict, you discover that the respect you were seeking was always within your reach. You just had to be brave enough to demand it.